You might hear the wind on the line, or the scrape of sand against metal. I keep the mic warm because sound is the only proof I have that anything still remembers how to speak. The world outside this transmitter is quieter now, but not with peace, with something like exhaustion. The sky stopped being a sky a long time ago. It hangs low and bruised, a permanent bruise that never heals. Some mornings it glows like a furnace. Other days it is a flat, acid gray that bleeds into the horizon. Once you could tell time by the sun. Now the sun is a rumor, a pale coin behind a stained glass of smoke and dust. Rain comes like a betrayal, too late, too acidic, too sudden, or not at all. Rivers that used to be arteries run as cracked scars. Floodplains flip to salt flats, and where ice had kept its slow, honest vigil, everything melted away and never returned. Cities became experiments in absence. Towers that once held offices, museums, and neon are open bones. Glass is gone from most windows. Iron ribs stand silhouetted against the dim sky. Streets are dune-swept. Highways are broken, sagging in places where the ground beneath them has shifted or sunk. Bridges hang like questions. Parks turn to scrubland, then to dust bowls, and finally to fields of rusted cars and half-buried playgrounds that still have swings, frozen mid-arc. Where a skyline used to say, "Look how far we've come," now you read the opposite. Look at how it ends. The smell is a compound: diesel, rot, burning plastic, and something metallic that tastes like old money. It clings to clothing, to skin, to the inside of this broadcast room. Sometimes at night the wind brings the sour note of charred wood from some distant burn that never fully dies. Wildfires learn to cross borders without passports. Storms learn to forget their old patterns. Seasons broke up into smaller lies. Winter could come with heat, and summer with a storm that made the air taste like iron. People dispersed. Some went inland, chasing groundwater and shade. Others trusted the coasts until the water finally pushed its way into homes, swallowing basements and swallowing the memories people had tied to them. The maps are useless. Whole counties moved. Names mean less than footprints now. Governments, the polite fiction of the way things used to work, collapsed at different speeds. In some places they held on like scabs. In others they split like dry clay. There are pockets where councils still try to recreate law. Makeshift courts in town halls, ration lists nailed to wooden posts. Men and women who remember clerks and records and rules. Elsewhere, power is a fist. Warlords and raiders claim old highways as toll roads. Militias form to protect wells, to protect greenhouses, to protect children. They call themselves anything: the keepers, the line, the free farmers. Names change as often as allegiances. Religion and charity tried to patch the worst holes. Churches became shelters, then bazaars, then forts. Hospital corridors turned into rows of tents where whoever had training and whatever medicine they could scavenge tried to be the old system with new tools. Universities emptied. Laboratories were stripped for copper and reagents, or repurposed to keep water clean and pumps running. Some researchers kept notebooks in the dark. Theories turned into schematics for survival rather than headlines. Trade is barter and rumor. The old economy, numbers on screens, and promises to pay later, is a parable now, a way to talk about a different century. Batteries and filters are currency. A good sealed can of water can buy a place to sleep for a week. Fuel is hoarded like scripture. Seeds, real seed, not corporate modified trash, are a treasure some will kill for, and others will trade their last warm blanket to obtain. Survivor groups form like tidal pools, brief ecosystems in a world that keeps changing the tide. Some stay put and fortify. Boarded-up malls turned into compounds with gardens on the roof and perimeters of jagged metal. Others are nomadic, traveling in convoys with flags made from old linens, trading what they can and passing on news like a living newspaper. And then there are the scavengers, efficient, animal, moving at night, taking what's left in the margins between makeshift laws. Institutions that mattered once are ghosts. Banks have vaults full of paper that no longer buys anything. Courts have microphones with no judges. The post office is a ruin full of letters to people who never received them. But things meant to keep people alive, waterworks, seed banks, and a few stubborn research outposts, keep their lights on in whatever small ways they can. They are beacons and targets. The landscape is a patchwork of extremes. Where forest once stood, there are tinder corridors that flare and die. Where wetlands were, salt plains bloom with crystalline algae that glow at night like distant campfires. Farmland, exhausted from years of drought and chemical overload, has been colonized by tough new grasses and things that bite. I have seen orchards that are only the idea of an orchard, rows of trunks hollowed out and blackened, the fruit that used to hang heavy, absent. And then there are anomalies that don't fit the pattern, small and terrible exceptions, the places that smell wrong, or where animals gather and stare at the sky, or where the earth has collapsed into sinkholes that whisper. People tell stories about places where the laws of the old world don't apply. I listen to those stories and put them through the sieve of logic until only the strange residue remains. The residue is usually worth remembering. From this transmitter, I can pick up the faint scratch of other lives, a generator in the mountains, laughter in a valley that still has fruit trees, a child humming a melody I haven't heard in years. Most of the time it's static. The static is honest. It says, we are here, but so much is gone. We are small and stubborn. We keep fires under pans. We find dew in the crevices of concrete. We mend. Outside, the weather keeps inventing new ways to be violent. Inside, we keep practicing the old ritual of kindness. A shared sip, a patched boot, a borrowed blanket. The world is broken, not finished. There is a waiting in the air, nervous, alert, like the breath before a bird takes off. We do not know what will come next. We only know we are still listening. They gave me a name once. People online had a way of doing that, turning a voice into a handle. Out here, names are the thinnest of comforts. You can call me Mara, if you like. Call me Static. Call me the voice on 89.7. It all fits. The important thing is the sound on the line. Steady, human, present. I learned early that the world remembers a voice longer than it remembers a face. I was a technician before the glass started to shatter for good. I wired networks for hospitals, patched fiber when floods chewed at the ground, and kept generators alive until insurance notices became irrelevant. Those skills are why this transmitter still breathes. The pedal generator under the workbench is a stubborn thing. When the chain slams, the meter jumps and the condenser hums like a small animal relieved. I keep a routine around it. Oil the bearings, check the brushes, listen for dents in the hum that mean trouble. A working generator is a law in itself now. It is the difference between being heard and being alone. Survival here is an accumulation of habits made into rituals. There's no glamour in it. I sleep in a room with a boarded window and a gap in the door patched with an old wool blanket. At first I tried to make it a home. Then I learned homes are a risk, unless they are negotiated with the weather and with other people. My roof collects rain when rain decides to be generous. The gutters are rigged to lead into barrels lined with charcoal and sand filters. I learned to take morning dew. A plastic sheet stretched over a shallow trough yields a few precious cups before the sun keels them away. Boiling is the last resort. Fuel is rare. So I keep a small crystal UV pen and a few iodine tablets in a tin marked for emergencies. Water rules everything. The radio sometimes becomes a bulletin board, caller with directions to a spring, another with a warning of a camp of armed men 3 valleys over. Information is itself a ration. Food is an exercise in memory. I grew up with canned peaches and summer tomatoes, with the smell of my mother's bread in an oven. Now I trade recipes for the taste of bark and the ways to coax tiny roots into something that resembles life. I tend a rooftop bed of hardy greens, kale, purslane, a stubborn row of beans that hates me sometimes and surprises me other days. I barter apple cuttings and saved seeds for salt and a jar of preserved fish now and again. Canning taught me patience. Salt and smoke preserve more than flesh. They preserve a sense that tomorrow can be eaten. I wake with the light that filters through dust, not with any clock. My mornings are practical. Check the perimeter lines. Thin wire tied to a row of tin cans that will rattle if anything approaches. Test the radio array. Charge the battery bank with the small array of panels bolted to the roof. Solar is temperamental. Cloudy days bruise the yield. I ration the battery's output. Enough to run the transmitter at certain hours, enough to light a lamp, enough to power the tiny compressor that keeps the cold box at a restaurant in the old district from thawing. Those old refrigerators make good cold rooms if you can jury-rig them to run on low amps. I patch the insulation in the walls with old maps, the paper of places that used to be. Maps are poetic waste now, but they make good insulation. What keeps me turning the crank is not just practicality. There's a ledger of debts and losses that sits in me like a stone. Before the world unraveled, I had a daughter. I used to record silly voices for her bedtime when my job ran late. I kept one on a thumb drive, a 3-minute loop of nonsense and a laugh that would break me open if I let it play. I have not let it play since the storm that took her. We think of grief as a private thing. Out here it is chemical and public. I can feel it in my bones when the wind makes certain whistles and it takes me back to a smell of damp hair and the small, stubborn weight of a child asleep on my shoulder. Guilt is its companion for not being able to hold her from the flood, for choosing the route that left the car where it could not win. That guilt is why I keep the mic warm. I do not broadcast to be brave. I broadcast because someone once answered my call, and it kept my memory from swelling into silence. There is also responsibility. The transmitter is a lifeline for neighbors, for the lonely who find comfort in hearing another breath, for the small convoy that meets in the dried riverbed east of town, for the scavenger children who tune their makeshift radios to my frequency to find news of what roads are dangerous, where the raiders are moving, whether the rumor of a functioning desal plant 3 counties over is true. I hold dispatches, names, requests. People have started leaving physical messages in a tin under the bench. Someone left a sketch once, a child's crayon son, fierce and crooked, with the words, "Keep it safe," scrawled beneath. I taped it to the wall by the generator, and it has the same authority as a map. The solitude is heavy. It presses against the glass of the radio room at night, bringing with it the echoes of every argument I did not have time to win, and every hand I did not hold. Loneliness can calcify into suspicion. I have learned to keep my guard high and my tone low. I answer with warmth on the microphone because sound is a kind of currency, but I do not invite strangers past the gate without a test of sweat or a task. Trust is earned in small proofs. Share water, show a wound, and let me bind it. Trade seed cuttings. The first time a man came to the gate with a rifle and claimed he represented a council that did not exist, I let him go. He was a mirror of what we fight against, not law, but the hunger for dominance. I have enemies and I have allies. The keepers over the ridge send an occasional truck for parts. They are part council, part ceremony, and they have rules that sound like old governments, but smell more like necessity. The line out by the salt flats is less sentimental. Their tolls are paid in fuel. And, sometimes in labor, you learn to root around them, to take the longer, quieter paths. There are other broadcasters, a scattered diaspora of voices like me. We do a loose relay sometimes, passing messages from a valley to a mountain. We call it the chain. We read names aloud to make sure someone, somewhere, remembers them. Survival is not only shelter and food and water, it is also patience. I nurse broken things until they work again. A transistor radio, a child's wind-up toy, an old solenoid pump. Repair is an act of faith in the possibility of the future. It is also a way of honoring the past. When I fix a clock that no longer keeps time, I remind myself that time lives on even without calendars. The psychological work is harder. There are nights when the static feels like a chorus of accusations. There are mornings when the rooftops seem too light and the emptiness is loud enough to hear footprints that aren't there. I practice rituals. I sweep the floor in the morning and say the names of 3 people I have not spoken to in a while. I play a fragment of a song into the mic sometimes because memory tastes like tune. I keep a small book of things I noticed each day. A plum tree with new buds, a fox that has learned to open tin cans, a line of ants carrying the skeleton of some forgotten feast. It's a small map of the world that still smells of life. And then there are the rumors that curl like smoke into every conversation, sightings of things that do not belong in the catalog of the modern world. Animals that move wrong, that walk like they remember being mountains. I do not yet know what to make of those whispers. I catalog them with the same care I catalog water sources. A report comes in, I log the coordinates, check with others, triangulate. If it's true, and not a desperate lie, the world is not only changing, it is rearranging its story. That thought is terrifying and, in a way, exhilarating. It reminds me that we are not the only actors on this damaged stage. I am tired, yes. My hands have calluses from cranks and repairs, from holding ropes against the wind, from digging when a pipe needed a junction. My voice sometimes cracks, especially when I read names aloud at dawn. But there is a stubborn current in me that refuses to be drowned by memory. If survival is a ledger, then hope is the thin margin that keeps the account from insolvency. I tend that margin like a small flame. I have no illusions of rebuilding what was lost in its entirety. I am not foolish enough to dream of skyscrapers reborn or oceans uncluttered with refuse, but I can promise you this. As long as the condenser hums and the antenna flexes in the wind, I will be on the line telling you what I see, what I hear, where the danger is, and where a small mercy waits. Call me by any name. Listen if you can. Tell someone else to listen too. Voices are how we keep from fading. You should have the kettle on if you're listening. Cold tea is better than no tea. I say that because nothing here is theatrical. I want you awake and warm when I tell you what's come down the pike. You already know the weather is bad. You know the rivers are tired. But what I'm about to lay out is the reason mornings taste heavier now. Why our maps have started to lie to us. Why animals move wrong and why men with guns call themselves angels. The crisis has many heads. It would be tidy to give it one name. A drought, a storm, a plague. But it's a braided rope. Climate collapse, resource collapse, and something else the old books didn't have a word for. I'll start with the simplest truth. The atmospheric engine that used to move our weather, its rhythms, its moderation, has been rewired. Heat pockets form and stall. Jet streams wobble like a loose belt. When the air sits in a place long enough, it cooks the land underneath, and then, when it finally moves, it unloads like a vengeful river. The result is extremes. Long, unbroken droughts punctuated by storms that arrive faster than the ground can drink. Where rain does fall, it can be salt-heavy or acid-laced, carrying runoff and corrosion and the chemicals of a century of forgetting. We used not to think of groundwater as fragile. We were wrong. Aquifers refill on scales longer than election cycles. Pumping them dry looked practical, until the wells began to betray entire townships. In our region, what passes for a riverbed is more memory than water. Cracked channels with the occasional bead of standing poison, a sheen of algae where the water stagnates. Wells that used to yield a glug now spit sand. Farmers who once irrigated whole valleys are digging for almost nothing and bringing up a mineral soup that will strip metal and teeth. These physical facts cascade into social facts. Food production collapses where soils are stripped or salted. Animal populations crash or move. Predators with nothing to eat become desperate. Flocks, herds, and flocks of birds that once migrated on calendar cues now travel at odd hours, or they don't come at all. With prey scarce, scavengers expand their range. That expansion is where the frightening reports start. People joke about monsters in bad weather, until the first monster eats a child. Then we stop joking. What we are seeing, what I log every week in the chain, is not merely coyotes taking more risk. It's behavior that bends taxonomy, creatures with features that do not fit their families, or old species appearing where they ought not to. There are carcasses with mismatched anatomy, eyes too large for their skulls, talons adapted like hands. There are animals that hunt in the daytime and move in coordinated packs that suggest social learning beyond the normal. They climb where they used to swim. They avoid human scent, or they follow it with uncanny patience. I will not dress this up. There are two plausible explanations that coexist and sometimes overlap. 1. Ecological stress and mutation. When environments change fast, pH shifts in soil and water from runoff, heavy metal contamination, increased background radiation from damaged infrastructure. Organisms adapt or die. Rapid adaptation can do weird things, altered behaviors, morphological changes over generations, sudden emergences of traits that look like mutation to us. 2. Long-dormant species, pushed out of their refuges by warming and human encroachment, are returning to niches they abandoned and encountering humans again. And a darker possibility that people whisper at night. Chemical and industrial byproducts acting like a catalyst for large, aberrant growths in animal physiology. Take that last part as rumor-backed speculation. It's worth cataloging, but not worth panicking over. What matters more is what this means for us. A predator that learns to ambush near water sources makes wells into death traps. A pack that sizes up humans as nuisance food means convoys must change routes. A creature that uses old infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, culverts, to hide and move upwind of camps means we can't assume the ground beneath our feet is ours. The cryptids, the name people started using when they realized monsters sounded foolish, are not consistent pests. They are adaptive. They watch. They learn the gaps in our routines. Our shortage of resources makes every encounter dangerous in a way that wasn't true before. Water, scarce and filthy. Food, canned goods are dwindling. Fuel, hoarded and taxed. Medicine, precious. I ration every can. I barter. I trade voice minutes for canned beans, seed cuttings for a jar of antibiotics. The chain relays locations of functioning solar arrays and the small labs that can distill water. When someone calls with coordinates for a spring, the call is gold, which is why everyone, us included, and the keepers and the line and the gangs who used to be called business people, moves for water. Water is the magnet that pulls all other problems close. Weather makes those movements dangerous. Storms now come without the courtesy of long forecasts. Barometers matter. I still check mine first thing each morning. A quick spike, then a dip. Those are the little betrayals that signal a storm forming in a pocket. But storms, too, are learning. Microbursts can collapse tents, strip leafing from trees, lift roofs the way an animal shakes a small rodent clean. Wind now can slice. When the sky hollows and spits its metallic rain, it brings with it gusts that carry debris and chemical particulates. We have had nights when the sky rained oil, and the next day a whole herd of deer washed up with their lungs full of whatever had erupted from a pipeline. The social fabric is fraying. People who were neighbors are now defenders, then fighters. A well-protected community is a fortress, and fortresses keep resources concentrated. Raiders stake claims and charge tolls. The line enforces routes like a bad toll road, and they are less interested in law than leverage. When the cryptids show up, some groups use them as weapons, driving them downwind toward rivals, using their fear to control movement. That is a new, ugly intelligence to human cruelty, weaponizing the unknown. On the chain, we argue about whether to broadcast animal movement patterns, fearing that the information will send more people to their deaths. I always lean to openness. The microphone is a town square, until someone burns it. I read coordinates plain and slow. I code warnings into songs and pulses, if I must. Broadcasts have to include practical instructions. Avoid valley bottoms during dawn when certain predators hunt. Travel in convoys with noise protocols to avoid being followed. Never light open fires in the blackouts because the flame attracts more than human eyes. These are tactics, not guarantees. Actionable basics I can give you now because you might need them. Collect dew on plastic sheets overnight if you lack a rain catch. Line barrels with cloth and sand to slow particulates. Filter water first through cloth, then through charcoal and sand, and finally treat it. Boil if you can. Use iodine or UV pens if you have them. If you are close to salt water, a simple solar still can pull potable water from the sea, though very slowly. It's better than walking miles for a potentially infected spring. Conserve fuel. Heat from a rocket stove uses less wood. Insulate with old maps, fabrics, or even packing materials before building a fire. Share medical knowledge. Basic wound cleaning, soap, water, and iodine, and not suturing unless you have a trained hand and sterile tools, because infection out here kills faster than stitches. If you are traveling, move at dawn or dusk when temperatures are moderate. But note, this is when some of the animals hunt. Choose your path by listening for birds. Noisy birds mean life, and likely predators avoid that area. Quiet, birdless corridors can be dangerous. We have tried science inside the collapse. A few labs kept some refrigeration and a few samples. They tested soils and found unexpected increases in certain heavy metals and endocrine-disrupting compounds that might be altering animal development. Others measured methane pulses as permafrost and peatlands destabilized. Gas releases change local chemistry and can affect flora and fauna. The big lesson? When a system is stressed, small inputs can have outsized outputs. A chemical spill that once would have been local can now set off a chain that changes a watershed's biology. I am no scientist, but I read their notes, and they read like a laundry list of how nature becomes a different thing when the scaffolding is removed. On the human side, we face behavioral feedback loops. Scarcity makes aggression rational. Aggression makes scarcity worse. Raiders take a well. People fight back. Crops are abandoned. Less food is produced next season. Refugees move, and the receiving area, strained already, splits into factions. The brain's instinct to hoard is not a moral failing. It is a survival algorithm running at the wrong scale now. We design systems to counter it. Cooperatives for wells, rotating watch schedules, shared seed banks. But those systems require trust, paperwork, and people who remember processes. Trust is a scarce good. Paperwork is a relic. I want to tell you about a moment that set the tone for this chapter of our lives. a convoy that left 2 weeks ago to check on a desalination rig. The rig was a rumor that turned out to be something more. A broken array on a rocky spit, half buried in rust, with panels intact but pumps chewed by rust and rodents. We sent a crew, me in the truck with the keepers and a scientist named Ilias who still thought he could make a pump run on low amps. We brought food and tools and a prayer. The first night we camped on the spit, a shape moved in the surf. It was too large for any known seal in the region. It had rows of bioluminescent growth along its flanks. Something that once would have been pretty in an aquarium looked murderous at midnight. It watched from the water, silent, and the dogs would not come near that shoreline. They whined and tucked, and then refused to go closer. The next day, one of the keepers found tracks that were as big as their boots and showed a gait that suggested both paddling and walking. The pumps failed then, for no mechanical reason. Wiring chewed, plates bent. We retreated with as much dignity as we could muster. The desal rig might have been salvageable, but the crew decided it wasn't worth it if someone or something was waiting in the water to pry open a skull. We lost a week's ration because of that decision. That's the arithmetic. A creature's curiosity costs us food, and food cost is people. You are listening because someone once heard you and answered. You are listening because we still bargain with the future in small ways. Trade, warning, a measured hand at the gate. The crisis is not a single headline. It is a daily calculus of risk. It is the decision whether to send a scout, to open a gate, to stand and defend a cistern. It is the knowledge that every resource is both a salvation and a beacon. I do not have magic solutions. I have a radio, a ledger, and a stubborn hope that information keeps us from making the same mistakes twice. So I log what we see. Timestamps, coordinates, animal behavior, storms, shifts in water flow. I triangulate reports through the chain. I pass along verified data, and sometimes I pass along rumors with a label. We do what we can. Chain wells with locks and human watchers. Rotate convoys. Build decoy feed sites for animals away from human water. And teach children to recognize bird calls as relative safety signals. We experiment with hobbled desal units and solar stills. We teach one another how to stitch wounds and how to distill alcohol for antiseptic when iodine is gone. This is not the romantic apocalypse in the movies. It is grinding, tactical, and it asks us to be brutal in our planning while tender in our small acts. The cryptids, if that is the word we must use, are now part of our weather and our politics. They are consequences and catalysts both. They are the wild card that makes a well a battleground and a rumor a prophecy. So level with me. Keep your ears open and your hands busy. If you have a report, an odd sighting, a strange carcass, a place the animals avoid, send it with coordinates and a time. If you can move water generation rigs off of exposed spits, do it. If you can teach someone to use a UV pen, do it. We don't have to be heroes. We only have to be careful and clever, and a little bit kinder than the situation deserves. I will keep the mic warm. I will keep cataloging and triangulating. I will read names for those gone and give out instructions for those left. The crisis is here. It is big, and it moves like a living thing. Our one advantage is that we can still listen to one another. Use that advantage. Use it like a lifeline. You hear me breathing into the mic because breath is proof. I'm doing that now because the story I'm about to tell needs edges. Sounds you can hang on to while the rest of it slips. Things have tightened since I last read coordinates over the chain. The world is not only meaner, it's becoming more clever. It learns from us the way a weed learns to find cracks. It started with the small betrayals. The garden on the roof, which had been humming with beans and purslane, went quiet in 3 nights. I thought it was deer at first, then raccoons, then a fox with clever hands. I found the tell, tiny, neat incisions on stems where something had clipped for sap. The beans were cut low, not eaten wholesale, just enough to keep me hoping and starving me slowly. Whoever or whatever did it wanted me to know someone else had come by. Water got worse. The barrels I had saved from the last hard rain showed a film of oil on top, as if someone had used them to dump motor oil, or the sky had vomited something. I burned through iodine tablets like a gambler burns through chips. Each morning I checked the condensers and the charcoal and muttered curses at the weather gods. A cistern leak took 2 days to find. A hairline crack under the tarp where wind had worked the seam loose. The repair cost me 4 hours of time I could not spare, and a ration of food that I ate because the work left me hollow. Food became a ledger of losses. Cans that had been counted and catalogued vanished from the shelf, not looted through the gate, but slid out at night under cover of muffled footsteps. I began to suspect someone knew the patterns in my day. When I checked the antenna, when I rolled the pedal gen, when I slept. That knowledge is dangerous. People with that knowledge can plan. Then the raiders came more openly. They had a name this time, the Ferrymen. They said they were guardians of movement, arbiters of routes. They charged fuel for passage, not coin. A line of bottles, a can of diesel, a mason jar of lamp oil. They were a shape and a habit more than a creed. They took what they could and left the rest as a warning. The first time they came with polite manners and rifles. They asked questions about bandwidth and broadcast times, and then wanted to use the transmitter on certain nights for their messages. I refused. That refusal cost us 3 days of sleep. Their scouts sat on the ridge like vultures and watched our vents for steam. A convoy we had been coordinating with, a cluster of 3 trucks from the keepers, was ambushed on a stretch of the old county road that had been choke-pointed by a misdirection of smoke and mirrors. The line had learned to fake road closures, old signs they'd repainted with new instructions that funneled traffic where sentries could collect tolls. The convoy left with 2 empty trucks and a trail of torn tarps and spilled salt. We lost food and a technician who had been good with pumps. They found him later, stripped of tools, a message carved into the door of his truck. Move on. Trust, which had been an odd currency used sparingly, became a commodity worth glints of metal. I began to interrogate my own instincts. There was a man, a singer who once called himself Jonah over the frequency, who turned up at the gate with a child tucked beneath a blanket. Jonah's voice had always been honest on the air. He sang the same lullabies my daughter used to hum. He said he'd been traveling for months and had heard my broadcast and came to trade a crate of preserved fish for a night's shelter. It felt like the kind of barter that stitched communities together. 2 nights later, I found that fish jar split open, and the fish filched by someone with a knife neat enough to be practiced. Jonah's story bent under scrutiny. A story of an orphan child and a theft ring in the East. A story that, when cross-checked with the chain, did not line up. He left in the early gray without asking for anything, but his child stayed. The child's eyes were old for a child. They watched the sky in that way the animals do now. I tried to convince myself it was just weariness. I told myself it was a test of giving. But the missing fish tasted like a ledger I could not reconcile. The crisis sharpened into a mystery when a faded map turned up in the tin beneath the bench. It wasn't mine. A hand had left it there, wrapped in oilcloth like an offering. On it, in a child's crayon and a careful adult's ink, was a place name I had not heard in years. The Quarry of Glass. Coordinates scribbled near it, a chain of numbers that matched a spot 2 days' travel north, if the roads were the same as the last printed maps. The note attached said only, water, clean, help, M. That M could mean anything. It could be a trick, a radio cast sent to lure desperate packs to a trap. It could be a joke. It could be the last act of a frightened city clerk who wanted a voice to carry. Or It could be a real functioning aquifer, a pocket of clean water left by some geological grace, sheltered from the chemical tides that ruined other springs. Rumors had been circling for months of artesian wells that never ran dry, of an old municipal reservoir with a buried pump that a tech could resurrect. Rumors are the bones of hope and the tools of rascaldom. Still, the map glowed in the dim light of the broadcast room like a promise. I debated alone and then debated with the chain. The keepers wanted to move on a repair and rescue mission. Ilias, who still wore the stubborn optimism of a scientist, argued the pump could be modified to run off a low-voltage array and provide a village with liters a day. The line argued it was a trap and wanted to buy the coordinates for themselves. That last suggestion smelled like a take. The ferryman offered to escort a convoy, for a fee, of course, but their rate was high enough to make you consider whether you were paying with food or with leverage. We assembled a small team anyway. Necessity bent our resolve. Necessity is a cruel parent. The group was an odd collage. 2 keepers who could wield a wrench like a prayer, Ilias with a satchel of tools and a face that still thought in diagrams, a woman named Sarah who ran a mobile clinic and wore a necklace of bottle caps like rosary beads, and a kid from the northern scrub who said he knew the route the birds took when they fled storms. I packed spare filters, a crate of iodine, and the little UV pen that had saved my hands once when an emergency fell into my lap. We left at dawn, because we always left at dawn. The light is obliging then, and the predators prefer shade. The road north was an argument in asphalt. Sections had collapsed into sinkholes where pipes beneath had burst and bled their guts into the soil. We detoured through suburban gutters that had become riverbeds and skirted a salt pan that glittered like a bad memory. Once we saw a herd of goats on a rooftop, heads peeking over the edge, like an orchestral joke the city had decided to keep. The town near the quarry had long since been cannibalized for parts. Windows used as greenhouses, concrete slabs pried up for heat-retaining blocks. The smell changed as we moved, from diesel and rot to something cleaner, mineral and old stone. At the mouth of the quarry of glass there was evidence of human traffic, footprints, a burned circle where someone had tried to make food, a smudge of paint on a boulder that read, in shorthand, "Keep it clean." None of the tracks matched military boots. They were a raggle of different sizes. Someone had been trying to live there with a principle, or to have the principle remembered. The quarry itself coughed up wind like a sleeping animal. It looked like a wound, circular and deep, full of glass shards from the days when the place had been an industrial collector. Then we heard it, the hum. At first it was a sound like a far-off transformer, like the earth making a small, useful noise. It was the sound of a pump buried deep. Someone had made something run down there. The hum had a rhythm that suggested not random power, but careful regulation. The team froze like animals at a scent. Ilias paled, the keeper's hands tightened on wrenches. That humming meant 2 things, water and energy. Both are magnets. We descended with patience because patience is the new cunning. The pumps were old, but the wiring was deliberate. Solar panels had been gathered and linked to inverters jury-rigged from salvage. Someone had engineered a primitive distillation and filtration system. Sand layers, charcoal, a crude membrane of woven fibers. The water tasted of stone and hope. When Sarah boiled a cup and handed it to me, my hands sang like a child's. And then the first footprint arrived that did not belong to humans. It came in the mud below the filtration beds, a triple-toed indent, deep and round, like the mark of a hand pressed sideways. It was too large to be a dog, and too regular to be a bear. We found other signs, feathers caught on a fence, fur with a sheen I have never seen on small mammals, a tooth embedded in a willow stump that belonged to nothing I could name. The team's argument split into 2 directions. One voice said, "Reinforce and stay, make the site a sanctuary." The other voice, older, practical, said, "Record, repair, and move the asset to someplace less exposed." The ferrymen would pay for the pump if they could control it. The line would pay for it if they could tax its users. Whoever controlled that pump could make or break 100 lives. We fortified the entry the first night. We set up tripwires and noise protocols and put the kid on watch because his eyes were good in the dark. The second night, something large walked the rim of the quarry, and the dogs refused to bark. It did not attack. It did not need to. It came to drink and watched us with a patience that felt like calculation. It moved like water over stone, tidal and deliberate. We had choices then that felt like the old world's tragedies spelled backward. We could keep the pump and try to build a community here, inviting others in and risking the attention of raiders and cryptids alike. Or we could leave the water and the engineering as a whispered secret, a rumor to be passed on to those who needed it most and could carry it away. Trust collapsed into a wedge. If we stayed, we might save lives and lose ourselves. If we left, we might betray people who had walked miles for this sip of clean water. I slept badly that night, with the hum under me and the moon like a burn scar over the rim. I thought of my daughter's small hands and that thumb drive of nonsense laughter I kept like contraband. I thought of Jonah and the child who watched the sky. I thought of the petty thief who took my fish. Trust was a small, brittle thing. And yet all the plans we made hinged on it. We decided at dawn to split the operation. Ilias and Sarah would stay to stabilize and modify the system to be less obvious on the spectrum. They tinkered with shielding and wiring and buried panels deeper. The rest of us, the keepers, the kid and me, took a loaded truck south to bring back materials we hoped could harden the site. We left with a promise to return before the week's end. Promises are currency. Making them spendable is the trick. On the way back, the world turned itself up another notch. The salt flats we skirted were alive with moving shadows. The ferrymen had set nets and ropes across a ford, and the convoy hit them at dusk. The trucks slowed, tires snagging on hidden lines, and the shadows coalesced into men with masks and scarves, their rifles steady and their faces impatient. The ferrymen had learned something, that control over water can be converted into the control of movement. They took one of our trucks and left a message carved in the cracked asphalt. Water belongs to those who can take it. When we finally crawled back to the quarry of glass, the hum was louder and thinner. Sarah's face was drawn. Ilias had a sleeping bag packed. His tools were fewer. They had done what they could. The distillation worked, but at a lower output. Someone had tried to pry a panel and left scratch marks that matched the ferryman's work. There was a new boot print, too, deeper, fresher, and with 3 toes. The rising action is a slope of small disasters that coalesce into a single avalanche. We can patch valves and teach kids how to read barometers, but the world keeps rearranging the problem set. Resources leak, not only in the physical sense, but in the social. Fear widens fissures between groups. The more we try to solve, the more cunning the world becomes in response. That is the pattern now. As I broadcast this, I am deciding which pieces of the plan to keep secret and which to place in the open ledger. I offer what I can to you. Directions, cautions, a note about birds and pumps, and I keep one thing private, the exact method we used to quiet the pump's spectral footprint on the frequency band, a trick that might buy minutes of secrecy. Minutes matter. Minutes by the time to move a pump or a person. We are learning to be less visible, to be quieter, to be less valuable in ways the predators can enumerate. We are learning to move water not like a trophy, but like contraband. We are learning to trust again, not because we are saints, but because nowhere else exists in which to be. The rising tension is not just about what comes at us. The raiders, the cryptids, the storms. It is about what we choose to do with what we find. Whether we hoard the pump or share it will decide who dies and who lives. Whether we tell the chain the coordinates will help most and hurt many. Whether we teach every child to read a star or to listen for the hum will shape the next season. Tonight I will read names and set watches. Tomorrow we will decide whether to broadcast the quarry of glass as a place of refuge, or to move the mechanism and bury the knowledge in a way that keeps more people safe. I do not know which choice is right. I only know that choosing is an action, and that inaction is a decision too. Listen to me. When you have water, obscure the tracks. When you have fuel, mark its loss in private. When you find somebody with the skill to fix a pump, decide if you will trust them with the secret of your life or keep them in the dark. We are all making these transactions now, not of goods, but of faith. The rising action is a test. We will learn our lines and our turns, and then something larger will make the final move. For now, keep your ears open and your footsteps quiet. If you are coming north, come slow and come with proof. If you are staying, set tripwires and teach someone how to read the hum. And if you ever hear a child's laugh on the frequency that sounds like a loop of a life that used to be, answer them. We keep our sanity by answering. You should have the radio close. If you've been with me at all, you know why. The mic is a lifeline and a trumpet, and sometimes a confession booth. Tonight, I used it like all three. We came back to the quarry of glass with the truck loaded and the sun low and polite, the kind of light that makes the world forget its edges for a minute. Ilias and Sarah had done what they could. Buried panels deeper, masked the inverter's EMI with a loop of ferrite and mashed up shielding. The distiller coughed out water in a small, stubborn trickle. It tasted of mineral and the promise of not dying. That promise smelled like wet stone. We had a plan that would have read like a small miracle in another life. Lift the pump on sleds, tow it to a ravine a half-day away where we could bury the system under boulders and brush and run the intake from a deep pool that the ferryman couldn't reach without crossing low ground that favored defense. I would stay, they said. I would keep the transmitter warm and broadcast a pattern that mimicked normal activity while they moved the hardware. It was the kind of plan stitched together by people who had learned to make hope into tools. I said yes because I believed, and because something in me needed to stay for reasons that had nothing to do with prudence. Staying felt to me like atonement and duty braided together, a single rope I could hold on to. My daughter's laugh, that looped contraband I kept on a thumb drive, sat in my chest like a tiny live thing. There are debts you cannot repay to the dead, except by keeping the living safe. We started at dusk. The kid from the north, eyes like a crow's, rode shotgun with two keepers on the sled. Ilias and Sarah worked at the axle, their hands spattered with rust and sweat, and the patient, precise dirt of people who still believed in torque. We rolled slow. The quarry rim was narrower than it had been in the map's memory, the wind like a hand that wanted to unmake things. I backed the truck in a circle to give the team cover and set up the transmitter under a shell of tarpaulin. I wired the generator to the lamp and to the mic and set the pedal generator ready as a failsafe. The hum was a comfort, a small animal under the table, until that hum got company. A whistle answered in the dark. Distant, patterned like a code, then another. The keepers froze, and the kid's jaw worked. On the ridge, shapes coalesced, low silhouettes moving without human gait. The ferrymen had learned the art of appearance. They moved at twilight with scarves and knives, and the old confidence of people used to taking what they needed. But they did not come alone. Below them, in the bowl of the quarry, something else moved with the sea's patience. A larger silhouette sliding through glass and mud like a thing that remembered tides. The first shot went up like an announcement. It wasn't intended for us. It was meant to scatter a flock of something else. The echo ricocheted and made the night feel brittle. Then the ferrymen called, voices low and sure. They asked for the pump. They said the desert had been generous to them, and now they would be generous in turn. They spoke like men reading from old scripts, where law and justice were props. I spoke back in a quieter code. I offered them nothing. They fired anyway. Not at us, but at the web of wires we had strung as a tripline. The night exploded into sound. Tin cans clattered, a trap sprung. Dogs barked, and then fell silent, like someone slapped a hand over their mouths. The three-toed prints I had seen earlier were in the mud now, closer, fresher. The arcs of them like punctuation. The cryptid watched. We had prepared for raiders. We had not prepared for coordination. The ferrymen had brought a rhythm that matched the creature's curiosity, lights that mimicked human movement, fires that smelled like bread, scents that suggest food. They were baiting the quarry for more than us. I made a decision then that felt like a hinge. I turned the transmitter on full, and not just a voice. I keyed it into the chain's old emergency frequency, and fed in a loop of machine noise we had been practicing, a pattern of ticks, hums, and frequency sweeps that sounded like the signals of movement across miles. Engines, clickers, human voices. The idea was simple. Make the night think we were a convoy on the far road, and draw attention away from the quarry rim where the pump lay. It is a mad thing to do when you have limited fuel. You can measure the use of a generator by the number of breaths it will buy you, but sometimes you spend breath to buy space for others. The pedals cranked. I fed current into the transmitter. The hum rose and then resolved into a meadow of sound. The ferryman answered, moving toward the fake convoy. The cryptid answered too, not toward the convoy, but toward the noise itself, as if the sound were a scent trailing across the land. Sarah's voice crackled in my ear. "Mara, they're trying to flank. The kid's seeing tracks inside the old culvert. We can't move the pump with them here." I had choices like a carved list in a priest's palm. I could cut the line and bolt. I could surrender the pump and keep my life and my guilt. I could stay and pray the hum was enough to distract both human and thing. I thought of my daughter, of that small loop of laughter. I thought of Jonah's child and the way those eyes watched the sky. I thought of the keepers who had trusted their hands to the sled. I thought of all the people who'd heard my voice and turned their faces to it on nights like this. So I did what I have always done. I chose to be loud. I pushed the transmitter beyond the normal limit. The condenser braided into a sharp keening that the wiring did not like. Sparks licked the tarpaulin like tongues. The hum became a note that hurt my teeth. I modulated it, folding in a lower frequency that the dogs hated, a higher one that made birds take flight, and a patterned click that sounded like a line of engines. It was brute force and theater. It was also a trap. The cryptid moved into the open like an animal crossing a lawn. It was larger than reports had been. Light streaked along its flanks, bioluminescent filaments or something like them that pulsed with the transmitter's modulation, as if it felt the beat and harmonized. It waded through the shallow pools at the quarry's bottom and lifted its head. For a moment, its profile against the sky was terrible and beautiful. A ridged crown, a mouth shaped like a history book, eyes that considered me as if I were a curiosity. The creature did not come to kill straight away. It came to listen. The ferrymen, misled by the noise, turned their line inward to the false convoy and smashed into old tar and scrap and something that answered with a hiss. Someone in their ranks shouted, and laughter cracked like glass. They were 60 distance and confident, because confidence is a currency they can print. They did not notice the three-toed prince until one of them tripped over one, and his head went down on the rim in a slow, awful way. The kid cried out. A shot went high, and the night answered. I kept the transmitter keyed. The generator shuddered. The meter bobbed red. Sparks began to smoke the tarpaulin, and I could smell hot plastic and the electric stench of overtaxed coils. There is an intimacy to knowing a machine is dying in consonance with you. It is a kind of shared surrender. Then the storm broke in a way the world had not taught us. It arrived as a sheet of rain layered with metallic taste, a wet that smelled wrong. It was chemical and sweet, and it fell thick enough to make the world blur. The noise of the transmitter bent, and the hum became a slipping thing. The pulses I had tuned began to scatter on the ionized air. The cryptid turned away for a moment, and then, as if annoyed by the weather, it moved up the rim toward the tarpaulin where I crouched, keeping the mic like an offering. Sarah's voice thinned over the line. "Mara, start the pedal and rotate the load. We're pulling the sled now. Ilias is with them. Go, go, go!" I could hear the sled scrape and the soft curses of people cursing because the world had taught them the language of metal. I could hear the kids' feet stamp in rhythm. I held the mic like an invocation. There is a particular kind of fear that is not cold and not hot. That is, the slow chemical of knowing your choice will carve consequences into somebody's life. It was quiet and precise, and it lived behind my ribs. I kept my voice soft and steady, and read names into the microphone as if they were wreaths. Names of people who had given water, and names of those who had taken it, and names of my daughter because speaking her name made the act of surviving feel holy. I keyed in the chain's safety code to make sure anyone listening would know we were moving an asset and might signal a fake route. It was protocol and litanies. The sled slid away with groaned axles and the sound of the world forgiving itself in motion. The pump was between two keepers, wrapped in canvas and straps, and the kind of prayer you make with rope. They moved like people who have been apprenticed to loss. They moved like people who will make a future by making small thefts from fate. The cryptid reached the tarpaulin as the generator hiccuped a complaint and began to die. It sniffed the air. For a second it seemed to nod or to understand. It put its head down and licked the melted corner of the plastic like a curious god tasting something new. Then, with a patience that reads like malice, it lifted a limb and extended a talon that was more hand than claw. It ripped the tarpaulin apart, and my radio went dark in a single clean exhale. I remember the sound as an unzipping. I remember the light as a flare. I remember thinking about trivial things, a dry shirt I hadn't washed, the little book of things noticed each day folded under the battery bank. I remember the arc of the creature's motion, as if it were slow cinema. Then there was the smell. Wet metal, and something wild, like the belly of a storm. I did not move. I had chosen to be loud. I had chosen to be the noise that bought time. Time is a fragile currency. The sled got across the ridge and out of sight. I heard Sarah's voice change from command to sob. I heard Ilias curse the gods, and then a different sound. A motor start, weak and high and hopeful. Somewhere, somebody had coaxed more life into an engine. When the creature found the generator, it did what animals do with offerings. It turned the offering into information. It tasted the wiring, and it learned the sound that made the quarry come alive. It did not rip me apart. It did not need to. It rummaged for the pattern and tasted the signal, and then crawled back to the water and watched us leave, like a solitary sentinel. The aftermath was not clean. The tarpaulin was shredded, the generator ruined. The transmitter's condenser had blown. My hands were burned where sparks had licked my fingers. My throat had the taste of smoke and hydraulic rain. The kid came back for me under dusk clouds, and the keepers pulled my arm where it had twisted. Sarah and Ilias reported later that the sled had made it 2 miles before a line of ferrymen attempted to intercept them, and a short, ugly exchange of gunfire settled the price of the pump. One keeper died with his hands wrapped in the rope, and another limped with a shoulder that would not be the same. We moved at night from that place, carrying what could be carried, burying what could not, and wrapping the pump in tarps that smelled of wet stone and hope. The route we took was longer, and the detours were full of the small cruelties of the world. Washed-out bridges, towns that used the word welcome once and now had faces painted on boards that looked like accusations. As we went, I broadcast in fits from the battery left in my pack. My voice was thin, but sound travels on different scales now. I read names, I read coordinates, I read a message to the chain. The pump moved. Move quiet. Avoid the ridge. I said the things I could not give them in person. I traded information for an account of life. And in the corner of the broadcast, as the generator smoked and the world tilted on its new axis, I said the one thing that will carry me forward. If you find clean water, do not keep it secret until you are starving. Share it with someone who has skill, not with someone who has money. Teach a child how to filter, and not a man how to charge a toll. Keep that lit. I do not know, even now, if I made the right choice. The calculus of the night was written in small tragedies we could not help but tally. We lost a keeper. We kept the pump. I lost a piece of gear and a little more of the shelter that a transmitter gave me. The kid slept on my shoulder that night, with his face pressed to the leather of my coat. I think he wanted to let me know that being loud was not always wrong. There will be consequences. Ferrymen will be angrier. The cryptid will carry the tune of our generator out into the world, and someone else may hear it and learn how to find us. But there will also be water. There will be a place to make tea that does not taste like regret. Tonight, the cliff we stood on changed shape. I sat at the remains of the transmitter and put the mic to my lips and read a list of names until the sky lightened. I read them because we are small, and our names are all the scaffolding we have left. I read them so the radio could carry them to someone else's ear and make them real. If you hear that loop of machine noise again on the chain, if you hear a strange hum in the night, know that someone did a thing that was part cowardice and part care. Know that the pump lives in some hidden place for now. Know that we paid for it in burned wires and in a man who will not come back to his family. Know that when the world asks you for a ledger, sometimes the margin you keep is the thing that saves another life. I am still breathing. The generator is quiet, and the hum in the quarry is memory for now. I bandaged my hands and poured a cup of the water Sarah brought with her in a thermos. I held it in both hands and said the names of 3 people I have not spoken to in a while. I turned the little thumb drive in my pocket and did not press play. Some memories are too loud for the night. Tomorrow we decide whether to make a sanctuary or to keep moving. Tonight we count what we saved and mourn what we could not. And like always, I will leave the mic on for anyone who needs to hear another voice in the dark. The days after the pump left the quarry of glass felt like walking through a house you once lived in, but never will again. Every familiar corner reminded you of what you had chosen and what you had lost. We kept moving the machine in pieces, hauling it over broken roads and under low-hanging wires, until it slept in a hollow under a ridge where foxes might sleep and raiders would have to work hard to find it. It gives less water there because we had to string a long intake and the pressure bleeds over miles. But it gives water that is clean and steady if you learn its hours and trade with its patience. That trade, hours for liters, lessons for a sip, is the currency of the new world. The immediate arithmetic of the decision was ugly and plain. We kept the pump and lost a man. One of the keepers did not wake the morning after the sled hit the line's ambush. He had his hands wrapped around the rope as if he could hold fate to the sled by sheer will. We buried him on a slope that looks toward the place he loved, an old stand of pines that somehow still stood against the salt winds. We said names over his grave, one by one, because in a place where paper loses value, names are ledgers for the heart. The ferrymen, angry and hungry, widened their tolls. They remarked roads and set new snares. The cryptid I baited with noise learned the pattern of our electrical signature in ways no one wanted it to. Within a week, other groups reported creatures following the sound like a trail of breadcrumbs across miles. We had taught the animal a taste for our signal, and, like all students with a dangerous teacher, it used what it learned in ways we did not intend. That is the cost of improvisation. Sometimes you fix one leak and make another one more visible. We tried to balance the ledger by teaching. Ilias and Sarah did not return to the quarry. They stayed to harden the new site. Sarah taught a small cohort basic wound care and sanitation, and how to coax a sterile amount of output from the pump without running it until it died. Ilias taught a rotation system for the panels so that the electromagnetic footprint could be masked on schedule. The kid with the crow's eyes, he calls himself Naji now, learned to read barometer changes and to run a manual backup crank we installed, so that if the generator died, a team of 4 could still pull up enough water to feed a small clinic for a day. Those are the innovations that matter. Low-tech fail-safes wrapped around whatever shiny miracle you can find. The chain helped. We broadcast schedules, not coordinates, and taught groups to stagger their visits so the ferryman could not predict a flow. We traded seed packets for watch duties and sharpened the ethics of sharing into something practical. There were arguments. There were people who wanted to sell access, to charge what the market would bear. We fought those ideas in meetings that felt like trying to keep a leaky boat afloat with paper cups. The moral architecture of survival does not pay wages. It sets parameters. We decided, not unanimously, but with enough voices to matter, to barter access for skills and labor, not for tolls. It felt small and maybe naive, but it kept some of the worst bargains from being struck. On nights when I could not sleep, when my hands throbbed from burns and the stench of scorched tar still haunted my pillow, I played the loop of my daughter's laugh without hearing it. I kept it in my pocket like a talisman. The thumb drive is still in my coat. I have not let it play, because sound can cleave you open if you let it. There is a shrine to restraint in choosing when to remember fully, and when to keep memory as a quiet, safe thing. I have learned that protection sometimes means not indulging in the luxury of total mourning. The environment did not take a breath of relief because we moved a pump. It continued its mathematics. More storms in some places, more droughts in others, and a scattering of odd pockets that showed small, stubborn life. At the new pump site, moss started to collect on stones where water dripped consistently. A few insects found the moist microclimate, and the birds followed. It is not a forest, it is a puddle with ambition. These small recoveries are the size of a coin, and we collect them and call them evidence that the planet is not finished with repair. But the chemical rain, the metallic, sweet storms, did not end. They visited us periodically and left a taste of oil in the gutters. The soil in many places remains salted and chemically tired. Sprouts struggle where seeds once thrived. Recovery, if it comes, will be slow and partial and earned. Inside me, something peeled back and exposed new layers I had not wanted to show the world. Guilt is a muscle that learns to be useful. It began as a raw, jagged thing. Accusation at myself for the keeper's death, for the radio I burned to make a sound big enough to move the creature, for not having saved Jonah's child from the theft that left me small. But guilt also became a teacher. It taught me to insist on rota systems, to demand redundancy, to make protocols that could be audited. If feeling guilty kept others from dying because I forced a second check on a strap or a backup on a battery, then guilt had a use beyond pain. Hope shrank and then reorganized itself. It no longer looked like the naive dream of rebuilding a city. Hope became procedural. You hope that the crank will turn, that Sarah will stitch the wound without infection, that the kid with his crow's eyes will learn the silent language of barometers in time. Hope took the form of training sessions in tents, of lists of names taped to the wall, of a ledger where we recorded each ration and who had promised seeds. It is small and frequently humiliating, but it is practical. That brand of hope is stubborn and hard-headed and better suited to survival than any speech about a new era. I have changed. I patrol less with an easy confidence and more with a cautious curiosity. Where I once would have answered every call on the chain, I now triangulate, cross-check, and sometimes ask for proof before amplifying a rumor that might kill. That makes me less generous with my airtime and more useful in the ways the world needs. My voice has lost some of its naive warmth. In its place is a cadence of someone who knows what an empty cistern looks like at midnight. Still, when a child sings on the frequency, pure and unknowing, I turn the mic toward them and let the sound fill the room. Because tenderness is currency too. Community hardened in strange ways. Some groups grew tighter, forming cooperatives with rotating councils and written rules on scrap wood. Others splintered, aggressive and quick to privatize any common good. The ferrymen remain a presence, and they are more dangerous for having tasted what a pump can do. The cryptids have adapted and learned the signatures of our devices. They are now a factor to be reckoned with in planning convoys. We added one more column to our risk assessment, animal learning. Our list now reads like a ledger with 3 categories: